today's episode of the SSPX podcast, we'll continue our apologetics series by looking at the necessity of revelation. Last episode, we saw how it was possible that God could speak to man. Now Father McFarland will join us to see if it was necessary. Did God have to give man revelation? Is revelation necessary for us to know who God is? Or can we know all about God just from our own reason and intellect? You'll find notes to all these episodes at sspxpodcast.com/apologetics, as well as all our previous episodes. There as well, you can find a link to help support this project. This is free to listen to, as well as all of the resources we're posting, but if you can help with a one-time or a small monthly recurring donation, you'll be making sure that we can continue this work of producing good Catholic content on a regular basis. Now, let's join Father McFarland for episode number 7 of our apologetic series on the SSPX podcast. Father McFarland, thank you for joining us for this episode of our apologetics series. And it's been a little while since we talked. Last time we talked was during the vocations series. So that went well.
Gave me plenty of time to get sick of me, and I even able to detox for a little bit. I'm back.
Just right at that time when we thought we were done with you, Father.
Yeah.
And you come right back. Well, today we are going to be continuing to talk a little bit about revelation. We saw with Father Franks last time about this idea that revelation is possible. It's not outside of the realm of possibility, essentially. What tack are you going to take while talking about revelation today, Father?
We're going to talk about whether or not revelation is necessary. So, following on the possibility, right? If God is God and he can do what he wants, it's possible. There, now you don't need to watch Father Franks's who knows how long episode. We can talk about whether or not that God in some way needs to reveal to us, or we need him to reveal to us. So there's need on one side or the other, as it were.
Okay, so there's when we say that it's needed or that there's a necessity, how do we? I mean, is there a way to break that down a little bit further, or like man just needs it? Okay, fine, cool, done.
Yep. Well, it like so many things in scholastic philosophy and theology. The first thing we ask is, well, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by this? The concept of necessity, and necessity can mean a lot of things. If you think of even just how we use it, I need air to survive is not the same thing as I need a beer. Like I'm not going to die if I don't get a beer. They're different senses of that same word. So we can break down necessity into a lot of different things. We talk about intrinsic necessity. We talk about a thing's material cause. So because a thing is composed of matter, then there are certain necessities. Man must have physical dimensions, for example, because he is a material being. Or man is mortal because of his physical material nature. Likewise, on the intrinsic side, because of a thing's we call the formal cause, because the thing is what it is. Right. So man must be reasonable, right, by his nature. He's defined man in philosophy as a rational animal. So if that's what a man is, and this is a man, then he needs to be rational, reasonable. Or a circle is round; it needs to be round, or it's not a circle. And those kinds of necessity don't really concern us so much in this discussion of the necessity of revelation, as we'll see. And then there's the extrinsic side. That is so because of an efficient cause, because of an agent doing something, whatever a thing does being necessarily due to the influence of the agent. So this fire must be hot, right? Being fire, it's producing heat. What's receiving that too, this being close to the fire must receive that heat. Right? So it is there. It needs to receive heat being close to the fire. And again, that's not so much our concern today as the next part, which is according to final cause. So a thing's purpose or goal. And we can say a final cause simply that there's an absolute need in a particular case. Something is, in order to attain a goal, it's not in any way possible without this thing. So if I'm going to the moon, I need some kind of rocket or other system of propulsion to get me there. Not just it would be nice to have it, not just because it sounds like that would be more fun, but because I'm not getting there at all if I don't have it. Right.
Okay.
So that's simply final cause, and then there's to get there in a better, more effective way. And I would say I need I need to buy a plane ticket to go to Rome. Right. Strictly speaking, do I absolutely need a plane ticket if I'm going to Rome? No, I could get on a train and go across country and get on a boat and sail to Europe and get on another train. But to get there more effectively in the best possible way, right, I go by plane. So for the better accomplishment, and this is the much better accomplishment in many cases of the goal, right, we speak about necessity. I need a car to go to thus and such place. Yes, strictly speaking, I could walk, but it's going to go a lot better if I have the assistance of that car for attaining my goal.
Right. So at the end of the day, that final cause, that's what revelation is. We need revelation to show us certain things. On one hand, we needed to show us mysteries because we couldn't know those without revelation. And
right. And so here, revelation has reference to the purpose of our existence. As I think you've seen in this series already, that man has an obligation to worship God and to work for the goal that God has established for him. And so the question is, what do I need in order to get there? Is revelation, right? Is that an absolute need, or is it one of these things that it's just better to have? And so our discussion of revelation will be around that question of final cause.
Okay. So is it, this is something I was actually going to ask Father Franks last time we were talking, but is God bound? And I know God isn't really bound to do anything, but does it make sense for him, or does God need to give us revelation?
So, I mean, we can say in a certain way, God's not bound to do things the way we might be. There's not an obligation imposed on him from the outside, but having, say, given man a particular end, then that does, it's incumbent upon him, according to his goodness and his wisdom, to give us the means for attaining that end, or else what was the point?
Right.
So God is, he's a free and intellectual being. He's not compelled to act in any way as such. He didn't have to give us a certain end. He can do what he wants. So there's nothing according to his nature that requires him to give us revelation. It depends on what he wants for us. And at the same time, revelation is something. The whole idea is something that is supernatural, beyond our capacity as human beings, our natural capacity to know these things. So our nature can't require something above our nature. That's, I think, pretty obvious if we think about it. And we are, been discussing largely up to this point in the Apologetics series, things we're able to know about God, to know about our last end, to know about our obligations to God. But we can know those things, at least to a certain extent, by the use of our natural reason, by our unaided natural powers. And that is without any revelation, right? So at least the bigger points, right? We can know the existence of God. We can know by reason that God rewards good and punishes evil. We can know that man has this obligation to worship God, because by being creatures, we are put directly into that relationship of dependence upon him, and we are rational beings having an intellect and will, which are creations of God, through which we have to honor him, to give him his due. And we find the knowledge of these things universally in human history, though, as we'll talk about a little bit later, with deviations and corruption, certainly. But throughout human history, we find men believing in the divine, believing in deities, believing in powers that are above themselves. We have this sense of right and wrong, that good will be rewarded and evil will be punished in the next life. And we see the obligation to worship. We see worship is a part of what humans do. It's worship of God.
Okay. So supernatural revelation, not totally necessary. We can figure things out on our own. We have but it's a very basic, it's a very broad framework of kind of morality.
Right. And so that is, of course, presuming that God hasn't given us an end above our nature.
Right.
But we'll come to that later.
Right. Okay.
But it's just not, if God hadn't given us that end that surpasses our nature, so if he hasn't, right, then revelation is not strictly necessary. But we will say that revelation is morally necessary. So not absolutely necessary, but morally necessary for a suitable knowledge, even of God and natural religion.
So what do you mean by suitable?
So,
like we would need it to do better, essentially?
so somewhere between the bare minimum necessary to reach a natural end, and on the one hand, and perfect knowledge on the other hand.
Okay.
So something fairly complete. The points that we are aware would be certain, right, without guesswork. I mean, maybe God wants us to do this. Sure. And without errors creeping in. And it would have to be accessible, that one can attain this knowledge at some point in one's life, and early enough in one's life. After my decades of contemplation, I now, at the age of 85, have finally figured out enough about natural religion to practice it for the next 20 minutes before I die. So something beyond, something that is accessible, something beyond that each person having to work out this lengthy process of reasoning to come to this suitable knowledge.
Mm-hmm. So like we've been saying, it is possible to obtain or attain knowledge of God through natural reason, but it's not very common that it happens. That's one of the reasons Aristotle is because he was kind of relatively rare.
Exceptionally rare. If we look at human history, we see very few who've gotten to a lot of this truth only through their reason. Again, we see everywhere kind of the big things. Okay, I understand that there is some higher power. I have a duty to worship it. I have certain obligations in its regard. But if you think about it, what Aristotle is able to know, who else knows that? I mean, the majority of human beings, and even probably of most cultures, most societies throughout human history, have no real philosophy, or it remains at a very, very basic and pertaining to daily life kind of practical way.
Right.
And even in those places where there were philosophers, how far did their influence even reach? Is the peasant farmer of ancient Greece? He's not going to hear Aristotle lecture. He's not picking up a scroll at the local store and reading Aristotle's Ethics, Nicomachean Ethics. ancient Greece it's rightly regarded as the pinnacle of unaided human reason in its philosophical exploration. And the greatest of the Greek philosophers, Aristotle especially, Socrates and Plato, we can include in that, they achieved a rather remarkable knowledge about God and even about our duties towards God. But we're talking about a long process of speculation in some 200 years of real philosophy taking place in Greece before we even get to Plato and Aristotle, and plenty of error on the way. And a lot of our knowledge of the history of that philosophy comes from Aristotle. He has a tendency to see everybody as kind of tending towards his own ideas. But that's a discussion for historians of philosophy.
Yeah.
But even Plato and Aristotle too had errors mixed in with the truth that they came to know. Plato had weird ideas about women and children being held in common by all men within the state. Aristotle defended the use of scandalous images of gods being used in temples and so on.
Right.
And then when they die, what's left of their work? We find Greek philosophy plunging back into materialism or skepticism or pantheism. On the other hand, in the Middle Ages, the great majority of philosophers are well acquainted with the natural truths that we've discussed in this series up to this point. But I wonder why. Something going on there.
Yeah.
They're well aware of it, accepting it, trying to put it into practice. And then in modern times, we have the new return to materialism, along with new approaches like idealism, subjectivism, etc., with the loss of the sense of those natural truths known by Aristotle and others.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
And then the history of people themselves and their practice of religion shows us precisely the same thing as the history of philosophy. We find consistently among the pagans, even the most civilized, among the Greeks and the Romans, whose temples and statues we admire and whose better philosophy is quite impressive, we find a host of errors and corruptions of the knowledge of God and the practice of religion. So, in the notion of God, we find in different places animism or polytheism or idolatry or pantheism. We find strange things going on in the worship of the gods, even taking licentious forms, places with temple prostitutes and the like. There are places where it included human sacrifice. The immortality of the soul was often disregarded, or after death was just seen as a place of a kind of punishment. And then in morality, all kinds of vicious practices were generally condoned and approved and even promoted. And something kind of a parentheses, but it's really the church, the influence of the Catholic Church that checked the violence and avarice and unbridled sexual license that really characterized the ancient world. And people who attack the church these days ought to do a little research on things like gladiatorial games and slavery in the Roman Empire before they're so quick to criticize.
Right.
And even just the notions of that we were obliged to act according to justice and charity. Like, just war theory is entirely Christian.
Yeah.
Like the Romans didn't have to explain to anybody they're going to war. Those guys over there have stuff. We want that stuff. We're going to go take it. They try to stop us. We're going to kill them. And everyone's like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So that's these are indications of our need for something. Right? We're getting a whole lot wrong in terms of the conduct of human life, and in particular in relation to God and to natural religion.
Sure. Without some sort of a guiding path, we are going to fall off the rails real fast. And most civilizations are going to.
Yep.
We've just seen it. Yeah.
Yep.
Which kind of brings us then into the concept of original sin, or what we haven't really gotten to proving that yet, but I guess we're getting there. What we would call original sin. But at the very basic level, there's this idea that there's something a little bit off about humans. There's something a little bit wrong for us just from the very get-go.
Right. There we have this universal tendency to act in ways that we know to be wrong, to be contrary to reason. At times we even make the deliberate choice of behaviors that we are fully aware will be detrimental to our own happiness. I can see that in the long term, this will be bad and make me miserable, but right now I want it, so I'm going to do it. We do that. All of us have done that. And, that kind of thing clouds our judgment very often. Right? And this doctrine is not the easiest one for men to accept, the doctrine of original sin. We can point out, at least here, it's not absurd. Why this is something that ancient philosophers looked at and said, what's wrong with man? Why can he not seem to act consistently for the good that he perceives? And if you think people are generally good, you probably don't have a lot of experience with people, or you're in denial. Just go to the post office or the DMV, to remind yourself. And we're not asking at this point in this podcast series for you to accept the idea of original sin, because it follows on revelation. But given our inability to come to that basic knowledge of God without corruptions creeping in, that inability to really know and follow through on all of our duties towards Him, and how much we get wrong in the moral law, you can start thinking that there might be something to this original sin business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we're going to get all this right, that what we need to know in order to fulfill our duties towards God, we need God to tell us something. Right? We know our own mental weakness and our tendency to error. Again, we all have that experience. There is, as we saw with the Greeks, laborious mental effort in arriving at even a somewhat suitable knowledge. 200 years of theological speculation of really great minds. And once again, it's not everybody who now has it. Everybody in Greece ascribing to the ideas of Aristotle. And then the other things that influence us, the corruption of the society that surrounds us, the bad ideas they may have that we need to purge, the pull of our own passions, preoccupations with providing for the necessities of life. All of that gets in the way of us reaching, by our natural reason, a suitable knowledge of God and our duties towards Him.
Mm.
So we say, if we are going to know what we need to know in a suitable way, even on the natural level, then God needs to reveal it to us. Even though that revelation may not be strictly necessary, and it is already necessary in that for the better way.
Yeah, it's practically necessary.
Practically, yes. Yeah, you can say that. Morally necessary.
We were looking with Father Albert a few episodes ago about the nature of man, the fact that man does have a supernatural end. Mm-hmm. How does this play into the necessity of revelation?
Well, it's a game changer,
right?
Because if God has given man a supernatural end, so an end that is by definition above man's nature, nothing in his natural powers can let him know that exists. Okay, so revelation, somehow God has to let us know that we have an end that's above our nature and the means to attain it. And that's going to be strictly necessary in this case. So some kind of revelation is going to be strictly, absolutely necessary if man has an end that surpasses his nature, if his final goal is something beyond the merely natural.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we have no ability to understand, I'm just recapping to make sure I understand it. If we have no ability to understand things that are supernatural, we have to have revelation to tell us things that are supernatural, and further to tell us how to attain things that are supernatural. That means revelation about these things is necessary, has to be done.
Yep.
Logically. Okay.
Right. And we have, if that's our goal, how do we move ourselves towards a goal that we don't even know about? And that goal is going to be according to our nature. So man knows a goal. And again, we have this, this is just part of our daily experience. There's something we want to do, right? We're not going to want to do something we don't know about. That's the whole idea behind advertising. Right. Is that it, puts before us things that, now we know, now we want it. But if we didn't know about it, we wouldn't want it. Mm-hmm. It's not possible for us to want it if we don't know about it. And if God wants us to want this end and to pursue it, then he has to let us know about it. And then he has to tell us how to get there. Because once again, it's above our nature.
So so would we say that the Catholic Church needs to kind of prove to us or show to us that this sort of revelation is necessary?
Yes. Yeah. And so everything else depends on the question of this, of having this, actually having this final goal that is supernatural. Okay, if that doesn't exist, then everything else that the church does or teaches falls apart. And so it is beyond our nature. So then it is up to the church making this claim that man has a supernatural goal. It then proves the reality of this revelation from God that we do. Here's the goal, and here are the means provided for its attainment.
Okay. It seems that that's kind of inherent in man as well, because there's always this idea within man, even if he doesn't know anything about revelation, even if he doesn't know any of those established truths, there's always kind of this desire to know things and understand things that are beyond his own intelligence. And that kind of points to the fact that there needs to be revelation as well.
Right. And there it's I would say more of a fittingness, and there's an appropriateness according to man's nature. Like God has built into us a thirst for knowledge, for goodness that surpass what we can attain naturally. Even the best things that we attain in this life don't fully satisfy us, right? We're always looking for something more. Mm-hmm. Right? So we're never fully satisfied with that created good. You can say there's a desire in us for something divine. This seeking that we find among men of all ages to become godlike, to be in some way, to be immortal. It's even the idea behind the very strange ideas of transhumanism that we encounter in our modern society. People trying to live forever, trying to have power beyond what is merely mortal.
Right.
Right. So there is that fittingness according to the way God made us, that we have this desire for something supernatural goal beyond us. And it's fitting on God's part too, not that he needs to give us a supernatural end and thus revelation, but because of his infinite goodness. I would say that the goodness spreads itself of itself. And it befits his infinite goodness to give man an end that is higher, that is beyond that is better than anything he's capable of attaining by his unaided powers.
Okay. So we've been talking about how revelation is necessary, how revelation needs to be given to man for a moral life, to understand supernatural things, etc. How do we know that revelation is revelation? How do we know that what one person says is not just a crazy guy having an acid trip? I mean, how do we know?
Right. And, there are plenty of claimants in the world to some sort of divine revelation. The first thing we will say is that revelation is going to be recognizable. If it's from God and he's making these things known to us, he's got to make it known in a way that's recognizable. Otherwise, he's not really making it known. An unknown revelation is a contradictional term.
Right.
If nobody knows this, then we don't even know that it happened, and yet we're still somehow supposed to to know it and use it for attaining our end, that's doesn't make any sense. And if it wasn't recognizable as true revelation, then we wouldn't be able to distinguish among those religions or persons, etc., who claim to have a revelation from God.
So that's then how we get into, I guess, what the church calls motives of credibility, or understanding how can we trust revelation or messages that we have received that are either from God directly or indirectly.
Right. So what are the motives of credibility, or what we can call the criteria of revelation? How do we know that this is true and not just true? How do we know that it's from God? So, and there are a couple of different aspects that you can look at. And one is there are negative qualities. So things that by which you can discount this as being a revelation from God. So how is it coming to me? Who is the person that is telling me? And then what is the message?
Okay.
So if we have a message, say, that is contrary to things that are knowable by natural reason. So if the revelation from God is that we don't need to worship God, for example, we can know that that's not a real revelation.
Mm-hmm.
We can judge the moral goodness. Is this revelation in accordance with what we know by reason about the duties of man and the observance of the natural law? And if it's contrary to that, if it's promoting things that are bad for human beings, are detrimental to their good, then we can disqualify that as well. Or if it's just trivial, that and you see some of these kinds of things sometimes with bogus revelations that pop up in the Catholic Church from time to time. People claiming that they're receiving messages from our Lord or Our Lady, and the important message is that they love you. Really, they need to make a special apparition to tell us that when
right.
we knew that. And so these are these things that belong to the message. So it's truthfulness, it's goodness, and it's sublimity, that it's teaching us something profound and unknown. Right? Those can be negative in the sense of, okay, well, it's not true, it's not good, or it's not sublime. Therefore, I can disqualify it as being a revelation from God. Or they can be positive, and we can say, okay, it is true and morally good and sublime. So there may be something there, but those things don't necessarily. Those. Okay, that's it. It has those qualities, therefore it could be from God. But something more is required for it to be proven to be a revelation from God. And that's what we're going to say is that the external criteria. So in our consideration of the messenger, the one who's bringing us the doctrine, although I should point out that on the external level, there are also negative criteria as well. If we think about the effects, right? What is this doctrine, this teaching? What is it producing? Is it generating greater moral goodness, greater peace, harmony, happiness, good things? And then who is this messenger? Is this someone God is likely to try to communicate to us through? Is this a good person? Is he we would say holy?
Right.
Does he have the marks of someone who would be receiving communications from God? Or does he seem to be, a charlatan? I have a history of scamming people, but I'm serious this time. This is really from God, right? God's not going to try to convey a very important message to us through a messenger that we're going to find untrustworthy. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But again, still, you've got a holy messenger and a doctrine that is producing good effects. Still not enough for the probative value. Right? It has not been proven to be a message from God. And there we're going to say that what is the positive and coercive criteria, those things that I guess say, okay, this must be from God, is that God will support the doctrine by signs that indicate divine action. And those signs are miracles and prophecies in particular. And there'll be further discussion of what those things are and what all of that means in later podcasts. But that the miracle, some kind of physical effect produced that must be produced by the power of God. So God, as it were, gives his stamp of approval to the individual who is teaching this, by the individual performing this work that we would call a miracle, something that could not be done by human power, or that cannot be explained by natural causes. But and this is, which we'll see, and not to get too much ahead of ourselves here, but in Jesus Christ, there has been among modern rationalists, and even you have Thomas Jefferson doing the same thing, trying to purge the Gospels of all the miracles. Mm-hmm. The whole thing doesn't make any sense without the miracles. But the only reason anyone's paying any attention to this teaching, despite the fact that Jesus is holy, Jesus is sublime, Jesus is charismatic, there's nothing erroneous or evil in the teaching. But it's the miracles that call the attention to it. It's the miracles that make people say that there's something here.
Right.
This man is walking on water and changing water into wine and multiplying bread to feed thousands of people. There's something beyond what we can understand there. I'm going to listen to what he has to say. Right. And I mean, you can think of ourselves in the same position. If, somebody's got some new teaching that they're spouting at us and we're like, yeah, whatever. And then he says, I'll prove it. I'll work a miracle. I'll show you this is from God. And he, makes water to suddenly rise out of the ground in a place where there was none. We say, all right, I'm listening. It does have that probative effect. And if that's done consistently in a way that is no longer can no longer be ascribed to coincidence or good luck or the like, then we ought to receive that teaching as coming from God, as being marked by the divine action. And the same goes for prophecies, which we can now, and broadly speaking, things that cannot not be known by any human reason on the practical level. So in the life of Jesus, we see him knowing the inner secrets of hearts, for example, knowing what people are thinking, knowing about people's pasts, and then at the same time predicting the future events. Mm-hmm. And those that has the capacity. How would you know that? Well, maybe it's possible that you could just get lucky once in a while guessing, but it gets to a point with again where it's done consistently and things of such a nature that there must be divine intervention for that knowledge to be present in the one who is giving this teaching that he's claiming comes from God.
Right. And again, we'll see. I think we have a full episode just on miracles. We have a full episode just on prophecies. Yep. And kind of how that all works. But this is just kind of this broader point that we can see that revelation can be true if we're looking at the messenger, and the messenger is, like you said, holy, basically a decent person, and his prophecies are backed up by, or his message is backed up either by prophecies or by miracles.
Right. Okay. And that's how we can recognize revelation is coming from God because it's supported by these proofs that can only be given by God.
Okay. Well, Father, this has been good. We appreciate you going through it. It's interesting. We've seen, is it possible for revelation to happen? Yes, it's possible. Okay, now we've seen that it's necessary. All right, now how do we see how it's, how to recognize that it is revelation? So I appreciate the very kind of slow march towards getting to the final point. And it'll take us till November, but we'll get there. Maybe December.
Right, and it is, it is important because you don't want to leave those gaps. Because if we just start talking about revelation and someone says, well, why do we need that? Is that even possible? And you haven't treated that, well, then, you don't want to leave those holes in the process of reasoning for those who are trying to come to the truth, but also for us to think about it, to understand and appreciate what we have from God, what we have in the church. It's useful for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Father, thanks so much. It looks like we're going to be having you back here in about 25 episodes or so, talking about the Mass. So you got a little bit of time.
I'll be ready.
Yeah.
I'll be ready.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for your time, Father. Good to see you.
My pleasure, Andrew. God bless you.
You too. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Apologetics series on the SSPX podcast and on our YouTube page. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube account and the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are found. And please consider leaving a rating or a review on this podcast. This will help to make sure more people can find this podcast and discover the beauty and the truth of traditional Catholicism. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and God bless you.